palace of Nero glows under the weight of its own gold. Torches tremble against marble walls, and the air itself feels thick as if silence has learned to suffocate. Somewhere within this golden labyrinth, footsteps echo slow, deliberate, cruelly calm. Power walks differently when it knows no limits. A soft voice rises, almost whispering through the emptiness. What happens when power falls in love with its own madness? A boy stands alone in the flickering light. His eyes are lowered, his breathing shallow, his hands trembling though no one has touched him yet. His beauty seems like a curse carved by the gods, too perfect to be real, too fragile to survive. The Emperor's shadow stretches across the floor, long and distorted, until it touches the boy's feet. The shadow moves, but the boy does not. In this moment, history doesn't speak, it shivers. Somewhere between the glitter of gold and the scent of burning oil, something unnatural is being born. Not love, not mercy, but obsession disguised as both. The camera drifts upward to the face of the Emperor, half hidden by firelight. His eyes do not blink. His gaze does not see a boy. It sees a reflection, a replacement, a body that might bring the dead back to life. And so begins a story not of conquest or glory, but of a boy who would become a mirror so cruelly polished that even the empire itself could not bear to look. By the time Rome realized what Nero had done to this child, it was already far too late. It is the year 65 AD, and Rome shines like a city made of fire and gold. The streets are full of noise and life. Men shout in the markets. Soldiers march through marble gates. From far away, the smell of incense and smoke fills the air. The empire of Nero stretches from the cold lands of Britain to the hot deserts near the Euphrates River. It is the largest world anyone has ever known, yet beneath its gold there is rot. In the middle of this great empire stands the Domus Aurea. It is the golden house of Nero. Its walls are covered in jewels and silver. Its ceilings shine like the morning sun. But inside these halls something darker lives. The emperor who owns everything is empty inside. He is surrounded by pleasure but haunted by memory. People speak softly about him when he passes. They say he has fire in his eyes and madness in his heart. In this world, beauty is not a blessing. It is a weapon. A face too perfect can destroy its owner. And among all the faces in Rome, there is one that draws the emperor's gaze. His name is Sporus, a young freedman, small, quiet. His eyes soft like the morning sea. He does not know yet that his beauty will make him famous. He does not know it will also destroy him. From the hilltops of the city, the palace shines like heaven. But in the alleys below, people whisper about Nero's strange desires. They say he collects beautiful things, not to keep them safe, but to make them his. And in the middle of this golden city, one boy is about to learn that in Rome, beauty is not a gift. It is a sentence. In the heart of the palace, the air is heavy with the smell of roses and smoke. The halls are silent, but that silence is not peace. It is the kind that hides fear. Servants move like shadows, keeping their eyes low. Everyone knows the emperor has changed. Poppaea Sabina, Nero's wife, is dead. Some say she died by accident. Others whisper that he struck her in anger. No one dares to ask. Her golden chair still stands beside the throne. Her perfume still lingers in the air as if her ghost has refused to leave. Nero walks through her empty rooms again and again. His face looks calm, but his eyes are hollow. He cannot accept that she is gone. He searches for her in every sound, in every corner, in every dream, until one day he sees a boy in the courtyard, a young servant with soft eyes and pale skin. His name is Sporus. For a moment, Nero stops breathing. The boy's face looks too familiar. The shape of his lips, the tilt of his head, the quiet fear in his eyes. It is as if Poppaea is standing before him again, reborn in a body that should not be hers. From that moment, the emperor's grief becomes something else. It becomes desire and delusion. He no longer wants to mourn. He wants to recreate. That day the empire changes forever, because death no longer means goodbye. It means replacement. The royal order was given in silence. The faces of the courtiers turned pale and fear spread through the air like smoke. Nero's desire had crossed the limits of humanity. To him, this command was not an act of cruelty, but an act of creation, as if a god were reshaping his creature in his own image. That night, Sporus was taken deep inside the palace to a place where ordinary servants never set foot. The light of the torches on the walls trembled. The room was cold, and the marble floor sent its chill through the bones. Before him stood the emperor's physicians. Their faces were quiet, but their eyes carried questions that no one dared to ask. Sporus's clothes were removed. He stood frozen in fear, unable to speak, his body trembling. He did not know what was about to happen to him. No one explained and no one listened. There were no screams, only the sound of breathing. The light of the lamps grew dim. In that moment, the heart of the palace seemed to stop beating. The emperor's will was fulfilled. The act that changed the young boy from a man into something unrecognized was complete. When it was over, silence filled the chamber. Only one figure remained standing, pale and empty, as if his soul had been left behind. When Sporus was brought before Nero, the emperor was smiling. He looked at him as if admiring a finished sculpture. Softly, he said the name Sabina, the name of his dead wife. In that instant, Sporus ceased to exist. He was no longer human, only a shadow. He was dressed in Poppaea's garments. Her perfume was placed in his hair, and the same necklace that once belonged to the empress hung around his neck. The servants of the palace were ordered to greet him as their queen. The boy was gone. In his place stood a living memory, a figure carved from someone else's sorrow. At night, Nero would sit beside him and speak the same words he once spoke to Poppaea. Sporus remained silent. The tears in his eyes never fell. When he looked into the mirror, he no longer saw himself. He saw the woman whom the emperor refused to let die. The palace believed Nero had revived love, but the truth was that Nero had buried humanity itself. He did not bring the dead back to life. He erased the living. The news spread through Rome like fire carried by the wind. The emperor was to marry again. At first, the people laughed, believing it was another of Nero's theatrical fantasies. But when the truth reached them, the laughter died. In every marketplace and bathhouse, whispers turned into fear. Mothers pulled their children close. Old men crossed themselves. They all asked the same question in disbelief. Who could the emperor possibly marry now? The day of the ceremony arrived. The palace glowed brighter than ever before. Golden curtains swayed in the air. The scent of roses, oil, and burning incense filled the great hall, until it felt like one could drown in perfume. Senators, generals, and noble families filled the chamber, their faces calm, but their hearts uncertain. No one dared to show hesitation. At the center stood Sporus. His silk gown belonged to the dead Empress Poppaea. Around his neck hung her pearls, glimmering in the torchlight. His hands shook as he clutched a bouquet of white lilies. Across from him, Nero waited. The emperor was radiant in royal crimson. His eyes were wild, shining with something that looked like love, but felt like obsession. The priest raised his voice and began the wedding rites. When the final words were spoken, Nero placed a golden ring upon Sporus's trembling hand. He lifted the veil and kissed him before the silent court. The applause that followed was thunderous, yet hollow. It was not the sound of celebration, but of submission. Later, Nero led his new empress through the streets of Rome. The crowds threw petals before them, shouting praises they did not believe. Torches flickered against the night sky, and the city glowed like a stage built for madness. The empire had witnessed a wedding unlike any other, and no one knew if they were cheering for love or for insanity. History often hides its darkest truths behind the glow of gold and the beauty of power. What looks like love may be control. What seems like devotion may be fear wearing a mask. Every empire tells its story with marble and music, but beneath that beauty lies a silence full of pain. If you have stayed with this story until now, you already feel the weight of what power can do to the human soul. This is not only the tragedy of one boy and one emperor, it is the reflection of every age that mistook cruelty for strength and obedience for love. The world remembers Nero for his music and his madness, for his fire and his fame. But few remember the quiet figure beside him, the one who paid the price for his dream. Stay until the end, because what happens next will show how madness turns love into destruction and memory into punishment. Inside the Golden Palace, silence grows heavy and slow. Every candle shakes, as if the light itself is nervous. In this quiet world, Sporus no longer lives as himself. He lives as an image. He lives as a reminder. He is the emperor's comfort and the emperor's wound at the very same time. Nero calls for him at strange hours. Sporus enters the chamber and finds the emperor waiting beside a bed of silk, speaking to him with a soft voice that belongs to another life. Nero uses the name Poppaea and asks for memories that are not Sporus's to give. At times, the emperor smiles with a kind of joy, a joy that does not touch his eyes. At other times, he shakes with a cold anger, accusing the boy of distance, accusing him of leaving, accusing him of dying again. Sporus answers with stillness. He has learned that quiet can be safer than truth. Morning brings the ritual of shape and sound. Servants dress Sporus in robes that once belonged to the dead empress. They set his hair, they place pearls, they press a scent of roses upon his skin. He is taught to walk with small, careful steps. He is told to speak with a soft mouth. He is told to sleep on the side she preferred. Every gesture becomes a rule, and every rule becomes a chain. The more perfect he becomes, the more absent he feels. At the table, Nero studies him like a painter studies light. The emperor asks him to sing the songs Poppaea loved. Sporus sings because survival needs a voice. In the polished metal of bowls and in the tall mirrors of the hall, he sees a face that looks familiar and wrong at the same time. Reflections break into pieces and join again, blurred and trembling, as if the palace itself cannot decide who stands there. The servants whisper that their ruler has fallen in love with a ghost. They say the ghost has learned to speak through the boy. Sometimes, late at night, a soft chorus seems to move through the corridors, a layer of breaths that carry a single name. Sabina, Sabina, Sabina. The sound is not loud, yet it fills the heart like smoke. Sporus feels himself thinning. Like paper held to a flame, he is wife in title and prisoner in truth. For Nero, this is love that refuses to die. For Sporus, this is death that refuses to end. He was loved and destroyed by the same hands. Outside the golden walls of the Domus Aurea, Rome began to tremble beneath the weight of its own silence. What had once been the heart of an empire now beat like a tired drum. Streets that once echoed with the sound of triumph now carried the whispers of rebellion. The marble statues seemed to watch as the loyalty that built the empire began to crack. The Senate gathered in secret, their faces pale in candlelight. Every conversation was a risk, every glance a signal. Even the Praetorian Guard, sworn to defend their emperor, began to lower their eyes when his name was spoken. But Nero saw none of it. His palace had become a world detached from reality. He called it his eternal stage. He walked through long corridors humming songs to himself, convinced the gods were still listening. The scent of burning incense mixed with the faint odor of smoke from the streets, but he ignored it. His fingers played the strings of the lyre as if sound alone could hold the empire together. At night, he performed for those too afraid to leave. Senators, poets, and generals sat in silence, watching their emperor lose himself to madness. Each song he sang felt like a farewell to reason. Sporus sat beside him, dressed in silk, his eyes reflecting the dying firelight. The emperor would look at him between verses and smile faintly, as if the boy's silence was applause. Outside, chaos grew louder. Food vanished. Coins lost their worth. The people began to shout Nero's name in fury. The golden eagle of Rome, once a symbol of eternal power, now looked ready to fall from the sky. For years, fear had been Rome's language. But now, fear was fading. And when fear fades, truth begins to speak. And in that truth, the empire began to hear the first sounds of its own collapse. The empire finally broke. The Senate turned its back. The Praetorian Guard, once the shield of emperors, now became the blade. Nero's statues were torn down one by one, their marble faces shattered under the feet of the same people who once bowed before them. Fires spread through the city again. Not by Nero's hand this time, but by the anger of his own citizens. Inside the palace, chaos began to breathe. Servants disappeared. Courtiers fled through secret corridors, carrying gold and fear in equal measure. Only a few remained those too bound or too broken to escape. Among them was Sporus. He watched Nero wander through the halls, half-dressed, half-mad. The emperor spoke to shadows, called out to gods who no longer listened. He told Sporus that the world had betrayed him, that only Sabina, remained faithful. The boy said nothing. He had long stopped correcting the emperor's delusion. When the news came that soldiers were approaching, Nero panicked. He gathered Sporus and a handful of servants and fled into the night. The man who once called himself divine now hid among the common filth of Rome's outskirts. They moved through narrow roads under moonlight, avoiding patrols, shivering in the cold. For the first time, Nero looked small. His robes were torn, his voice uncertain. In an abandoned villa outside the city, the emperor waited for dawn. He held a dagger in trembling hands, muttering about destiny and art. Sporus knelt beside him, silent as ever. When Nero pressed the blade against his throat, he ordered Sporus to watch. "When I die," he whispered, "tell them the world has lost an artist." The dagger fell. The silence that followed felt heavier than any empire. And in that silence, Sporus realized he had witnessed the end of a god who created his own hell. When Nero's body grew cold, the empire did not mourn. Rome simply moved on, as if erasing his name could erase the memory of his madness. But one trace remained, the boy who had been forced to live as his empress. Sporus, the living ghost of Nero's obsession, was taken not as a man, but as a relic. Galba, the new emperor, inherited Nero's wealth, his palaces, and his human trophies. Among them was Sporus. The boy was brought before him like property, fragile and silent, dressed still in the remnants of royal silk. The courtiers whispered, some in pity, some in disgust. For them, he was not a victim. He was proof of how far madness could go when it wore a crown. Galba kept him in quiet captivity, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps out of fear. The palace no longer demanded that he act as an empress, but neither did it let him be himself. He lived between worlds, not free, not enslaved, not male, not female. He ate from gold plates, but carried the emptiness of a beggar. When Galba fell, Sporus passed to another ruler, then another. Each new emperor treated him as an artifact of a cursed reign. They paraded him not for his beauty, but for the story his body told, the story of Nero's sin. His presence became entertainment, a conversation piece, something to remind Rome that even power could rot. Everywhere he went, whispers followed. Some called him the widow of Nero, others, the shadow that outlived its master. But no one ever called him by his name. Sporus had become history's possession, too infamous to pity, too broken to hate. He was no longer a man, no longer a boy, no longer even a symbol of suffering. He was the memory of someone else's madness carved into human form. Under Emperor Vitellius, the cruel spectacle of Rome reached its final act. The city that once worshipped power now demanded blood for entertainment. Among the many condemned to perform in the arena was Sporus, the last living shadow of Nero's madness. Vitellius planned something special. He ordered that Sporus be dressed as the goddess Persephone, the maiden who was dragged into the underworld. The crowd would watch as soldiers reenacted her abduction, a divine myth turned into public humiliation. It was not punishment, it was mockery. When Sporus heard the order, he did not cry. He did not plead. He simply sat in silence, staring at his reflection in a bronze mirror. The face looking back at him was neither male nor female, neither alive nor dead. It was the mask that Rome had made for him. That night, he lit a small oil lamp. He folded the silk robe he had been given for the performance and placed it beside the flame. The palace around him was loud with laughter and music, but inside his chamber there was only stillness. He picked up a blade and held it to his chest. For the first time in his life, the choice was his. When dawn came, the arena waited, but Sporus did not appear. He had already escaped not into freedom, but into silence. And that silence was his final act of defiance. Power can shape cities, rebuild palaces, and carve history into stone, but it can never possess the soul. Nero believed he could command life and death as if both were servants. Yet all his gold and glory could not bring back love or silence the echo of what he destroyed. Sporus was never a ruler, never a warrior, yet his story outlived them all. He became the reflection of every system that confuses control with devotion and cruelty with care. In him, we see the truth that power without empathy always consumes itself. Rome tried to forget his name, but history has a way of remembering those who suffer quietly. His tragedy is not just of the past. It is a mirror that still speaks to anyone who has ever been reshaped by another's will. When power pretends to be love, humanity becomes the sacrifice, and the silence that follows is always the sound of truth. If this story moved you, remember that history is not made only by kings and empires. It is also shaped by the forgotten, the broken, and the silenced. Sporus was never meant to be remembered, yet his silence speaks louder than Nero's songs ever could. In every age, there are those who hold power and those who are shaped by it. Their names may fade, but their pain remains carved in time. If you want to uncover the truths that history tried to bury, stay with us, because the next story reveals another emperor who turned death itself into a stage. Until then, listen to the silence. It always remembers what power wants to forget.